Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. When last we talked about Lafayette's tour in the Greater Western New York region, we ended at Lockport. What happened next? We'll be covering that in this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which, as always, is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The London Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hi there, and welcome back, everyone, for part two of Lafayette's tour of the Greater Western New York region. Again, with me this week is Julien Icher. He is the president and founder of Lafayette Trail, Inc., which has been placing markers throughout the states where Lafayette visited almost 200 years ago. Julien, this is something maybe we didn't talk about before. Tell us a little bit about the 200th anniversary celebration coming up. What are the plans for the celebration there?
So the 200th anniversary, 200 years after Lafayette's tour, there is going to be obviously a momentum around the country with a variety of different groups that are involving, including ours, communities, trying to help communities get ready, get prepared, be able to produce their own celebration, maybe a reenactment, maybe another unveiling of the marker, maybe a dinner. So there are a lot of groups around the country, to name a few: the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Sons of the American Revolution, the American Friends of Lafayette, the Lafayette Trail. So there are plenty of groups, the Society of the Cincinnati. There are many of them that are getting structures in their organizations to get ready for that event. And I think it's a great thing. I think it shows the vitality of Lafayette's legacy in the United States. We have produced a website called Lafayette2024.org to help any town that is interested in preparing something. If you want to have a screening of a Fall of the Frenchman episode, if you want to have a marker unveiling, if you want to do a talk, whatever, our work is here to sustain you, to support you in your celebration of the bicentennial. We think it's a very important milestone for the country in a way that it's a landmark. People love landmarks. So like for us, we will be doing a marker unveiling on Staten Island on August the 15th, 2024 to kick off that 1-year anniversary. We will be doing other ones around the country on the exact day 200 years ago after Lafayette visited these communities. We'll be posting on our social media channels, the Lafayette Trail, on Instagram, on Facebook, on X, every day where Lafayette was, and to try to share all the work that's being done around the country by other organizations and communities. So it's going to be, this is what a trail does, right? This is kind of the pinnacle of the Lafayette Trail. A trail, it connects, right? It's a cultural trail. We want to talk about history. People are going to go outdoors. They're going to follow the markers. So it's going to be a good moment to have a conversation. And my job is basically to have all our content ready for that big moment so that we can, at that time, switch from producing content to distributing all the content that we've been accumulating and producing for years. That's going to be the strategy.
And speaking of content, you're coming out with a book, too, that talks about the entire tour, 1824, 1825, across all the states. When do you anticipate that book coming out?
Well, the manuscript is done, so I'm just waiting for a publication deal at this point. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. We'll see what happens, but I am very hopeful. I think that it's a message that deserves to be told, and I just had a great fun writing it, and I think it's I'm writing in English, so to me it's wonderful to be able to communicate in another language to Americans here and try to share some of my research with them and the plans and what I think the story of Lafayette encapsulates.
So if you think that, you the listener out there, think that you have a place where Lafayette traveled through and it's well documented, go to the LafayetteTrail.org, and that's where you'll get the instructions on how to apply for this grant program. Are there any requirements? I think you need to have a nonprofit or something involved.
So yeah, for the markers, so we have donated about 125 of these markers. That's a lot of markers around the country, all the 22 states out of the 24 that Lafayette visited. We do need a few more to be able to say that we have a marker in every state. Basically, we hope to get to that point. Missouri is one of the states we're missing. West Virginia, which at the time was part of Virginia, is the state that we're missing, and Rhode Island. I think these are the only states that we don't have a marker in. The issue with Rhode Island is it's such a tiny state that Lafayette only made 1 or 2 stops, and if you happen to have landowners at these 2 locations that are not able or interested to have a marker, you're out of possibilities. But to have a sign, we basically need primary source documentation, so a newspaper from 1824 or 1825 that covers the event and documents what Lafayette did. And we have a great partnership with a foundation in New York, in Syracuse, New York, the William G. Pomeroy Foundation, that is specifically designed to help communities celebrate their history with historical markers. So we have a great partnership with them to honor Lafayette throughout the country. The bicentennial markers that we have, the Lafayette Trail, the blue that you just keep showing, these are markers available to just about anybody that has the data to support a sign and that has a landowner willing to let us use their property to donate the marker and have it installed. So there's a process for that. People can reach out to me directly to the Lafayette Trail and try to get a marker in their community. I think that's a pretty straightforward and streamlined process now that has worked, as I said, dozens of times. And yeah, we usually what happens, and we'll do this during the bicentennial, is we have the marker placed a few days or a few weeks before the day of the unveiling. We put a cover sheet on it, and we basically unveil the marker. We have remarks, we do a talk, we do photo opportunities. We hear from the local stakeholders that are involved in the preparation of the marker, and it's just a great moment. You know, it brings the content, it's original content, it's a great story. It's part of a national movement that has so many communities, hundreds of communities around the country. So, you know, we get to talk to each other. We get to meet each other. We meet new people. We make new friends. It's very important. And to me, that's just as much of a force as documenting Lafayette's life itself, you know?
So, speaking of documentation, let's go back to the tour. We left off at Lockport, and from there, Lafayette took a canal boat and stopped by Rochester. We're going to pull up the map again so everyone can see. So tell us the tale from Lockport to Rochester. What was the significance of that?
Well, the significance, as I pointed out, is allusions to the Erie Canal. So from Lockport to Rochester, he is on the canal. He's sailing overnight, and he arrives on the 7th in Rochester in the morning, 1825. We do not have a marker in Rochester just yet. We have been trying to, but it's a larger city, so it's a little more difficult. The public library that we contacted, because that's where the aqueduct of the canal was next to it. We thought it was a great idea to have it there. We were not able to get permission there, so maybe we'll have another site in Rochester. But at the moment, we don't have any active projects in Rochester itself. So Rochester, as you pointed out, in this June 7th in the morning, he gets there from the canal. He disembarks from the canal, and then he goes by land through Mendon to Canandaigua, where he spends the night. So that's June the 7th into the 8th. And then from Canandaigua goes eastward, you know, Geneva. I'm going to talk about Waterloo. Skaneateles, he arrives there like at night, the next day at 1 o'clock in the morning. On the 9th, he gets there. And on June the 9th, about at daybreak, around 6 in the morning, he arrives to Syracuse after having gone by Marcellus and Onondaga Hollow. He gets to Syracuse and he gets again on the canal there. So it's really a journey on and off the canal. I think it shows also the development of Western New York, the positive effect that the building of the canal is having on the western part of New York. I think it's a common narrative that ties all of these communities together. And I think it's great that Lafayette provides another angle to that Erie Canal narrative, maybe a Revolutionary War-oriented narrative that also talks about internal improvements and the growth of this country to the west.
So we want to remind everyone that the Erie Canal was under construction, still under construction at this point, and it wasn't completed between Rochester and Syracuse, which is why Lafayette had to take the land route. And that land route had him pass through several communities, not just Mendon, which we showed there, but other communities too. tell us a little bit about maybe the reception that he got, and how fast he moved. Go over
Very
the
quick.
dates again. Like, when did he start in Buffalo? What was the day in Buffalo? And what was the day
June
in
the 4th.
Geneva?
So, yeah, June the 4th is when he enters New York, Chautauqua County, June the 4th. So think about in 5 days, he goes from Fredonia, New York, Fredonia to Syracuse. That's crazy for 1825. That is absolutely insane. And making stops. He's not getting on interstate, okay, or the throughway. That's not an option at the time. So he has to make these little stops in these communities. He has to get on the canal, off the canal. He has to sit there and listen to an address that takes an hour because people revere him, and he has to do that at every single stop. So no matter how long he has to spend in some communities, he's able to get it in 5 days to Syracuse. So to me, that is mind blowing. And think about doing that for an entire year. And he's 67. So that is really that is really exhausting. And he's got to be exhausted. He's not flying on a plane. He doesn't have air conditioning. He's getting on a carriage. The roads sometimes are off. Sometimes he gets on a steamer. Sometimes the steamboat has an issue and it has to be changed, or literally, like it happened on the Ohio River, it sinks and he has to be rescued in order to move forward in his journey. So it's just an incredible story, the pace at which he advanced across this great union, and he was able to meet the deadline. He was committed to lay the cornerstone of the Bunker Hill Monument on June the 17th, 1825. And you know what? When he left Washington, D.C., at the end of February 1825, and he goes down the south and he goes up the Mississippi and all that stuff. I'll tell you what, when you get to New Orleans and you're so far away and you're in April, when he leaves New Orleans, it's April the 15th, 1825, and you have to be back and you have like a few months to be back to Boston and you have all these stops and all these states to visit. I don't know. I would feel a little, pressured. Am I going to make it or not? So, in fact, it led to a few changes here and there. Like sometimes he was supposed to cut through a state, and instead he stayed on the river because he had to get back. And he made it. He made it back on time. He was back in Boston to lay the cornerstone. It was okay, but he cut it really short. And that just tells you that he survived the immensity of this country. He tried his best to honor people, honor their affection and their interest in him and what he represented. And at the same time, he respected his previous commitments. And I think that's great for everybody.
If you read the contemporary newspaper articles, these are the ones that were written in June of 1825, as he passes through the greater Western New York region. There is a remarkable similarity where Lafayette comes in often without a lot of sleep, but hits the ground running early in the morning for a breakfast, as you say, pageantry, decorum, speeches, and toasts, by the way, many of which are documented in these newspaper articles. And Lafayette is always characterized as this amazingly friendly type of person, very grateful for having been received. And also, it seems like he remembers people. Some of these people are like, I haven't seen him in 40 or 50 years. So one of them in particular, now this is probably easy to remember, is Red Jacket in Buffalo. They both met when they were very young. And so the newspaper article talks about how they've aged, and despite this age and the ravages which Lafayette went through, which is another story altogether, Red Jacket was still able to recognize him and commend him as a person for what he's done. So
Yeah.
You said that there was a story in Waterloo. Let's save that for the commercial break. When we come back, we'll have Julien tell us about what happened in Waterloo that may have been interesting. Be right back.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Well, thank you all for coming back here at the State of Greater Western New York Report, where we're talking with Julien Icher, the president and founder of the Lafayette Trail .org. Sorry, that's the website, but the Inc is actually the corporate name. Julien, let's pop up this map again just to give people a sense for how fast things traveled. So here's the marker in Mendon. Or no, I'm sorry, that's Albany. Here's the marker in Mendon. And here's the marker in Waterloo. So that was maybe a little bit more than a day's worth of travel in real time. And yet he made 2 stops in between, at least 2, where there were no markers, but they were major stops in Geneva and Canandaigua. Tell us a little bit about what happened in Waterloo and why it's of note.
So in Waterloo, and it's actually on the sign, we thought it was interesting, certainly, but also deserving of being mentioned. A gentleman, a captain, passed away. He was killed by the burst of a swivel that was going on throughout the celebrations in that town. His name was J.L. Parsons. And there's a great story, not great, I shouldn't say great, I'm sorry, but there's an interesting story reported by the newspapers that claims that Lafayette felt so bad for the widow of J.L. Parsons that he gave her $700 out of his pocket before he left. And I remember debunking that story because a month later, in August of 1825, there's another newspaper that claims that this story was bogus, that J.L. Parsons was a single man, that he didn't have any widow, and that Lafayette never gave him anything. However, the story mentions that the Bank of the United States gave the mother of Mr. Parsons $1,000. So I just like that episode because it shows the extent to which people would actually change their lives in order to honor Lafayette with a proper, decent celebration. That to me speaks volume about how people felt about what he represented and how much they appreciated their sacrifice for their country and what it has become. And this man, Mr. Parsons, in preparing for the celebrations of Lafayette in Waterloo, was killed preparing for his visit. So we thought it was appropriate to mention that. It was a unique story. It's unique to Waterloo in the area. And we thought, working with the locals, that this message ought to be mentioned on the marker. We did that. We did an unveiling of the sign. We were able to tell that story to the folks in attendance. We had a great turnout. And I think it was appreciated. I think people appreciated that angle, that it was just not a reception and he spent the night and he moved on, but it was moving on so many ways. And at the same time, we were able to prove how we use primary source materials to debunk local lore and stay fact-driven. That's, to me, the specificity of the Lafayette Trail, is that we have built fact-driven analysis and a primary source material supported documentation at the scale of the United States. I think it's unique to our work. I think we should be very proud of that, and we are. And we're trying to spread this educational content across the country to educate Americans as the bicentennial comes closer about what it means to celebrate this man and why, as this milestone is upon us, the country should pay attention to Mr. Lafayette and what he still represents to this country.
I think that what this teaches you also is don't always believe what you read in the newspaper. So, but on the other hand, it also shows the extent to which Lafayette is admired. Because even when you make up a story, that particular story, though false, demonstrates that the amount of respect that people have for Lafayette, and their belief that he is this above average kind of guy in terms of how he feels for people.
Uh,
Again, it's
I mean,
demonstrated throughout all the writing.
if I can just kick in for like 30 seconds here, there's a great story in Maryland. It's actually when Lafayette got on a boat call in a town called Frenchtown. It's gone now. It's near Elktown, Maryland, and he was going to Baltimore and on a steamer. And on the steamer, when he was getting some sleep, the folks arranged for him and his entourage, the secretary Levasseur and his son George Washington Lafayette, to have a private room. And basically, the rest of the boat attendees that were on the boat as well, they were given like homespun beds on the floor of the boat. One of them was John Quincy Adams, who was at the time Secretary of State. He's about to be President of the United States. He sleeps on the floor just because Lafayette is in the boat and he has to get on the bed. That's humility to me is incredible. That you are about, or you're at the highest levels of the government and you're still going to sleep on the floor. That to me is incredible. That just speaks so well about how people felt about Lafayette and how they wanted to honor him no matter what the cost was. Think about Mr. Quincy Adams that sleeps on the floor. Think about that for a second.
And I think this legacy continues to today. Speak to that for a second, and tell us about what you've seen just traveling the country, putting up these markers that maybe shares the same experience that Lafayette had.
So to me, um, in the United States today, um, the country being divided as it was, in fact, in 1824, Lafayette at that time was in the country to remind people of the institutions that they had that really were resilient enough that they could withhold such political division. And I think there is a message today in a similar vibe to tell Americans 200 years later that looking at the legacy of this man can also help create or reinforce some middle ground to have a dialogue about the future of this country and the mission that it has on earth, and how the Constitution is a unique feature of this country and how the country has progressed since the adoption of that document into what Washington called at that time already closest to perfection of a government that had ever been tried by mankind until then. So that's the American nation. It's the pride in the government that you have, that the people still have here. And I have seen around the country people rally behind the legacy of Lafayette for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's because they revere his service, that he was a veteran, that he kept the country together in 1824 in the middle of the presidential election. Maybe it's because he was an abolitionist and that he pushed the founders, like George Washington, but also others, to act more aggressively about slavery. He did so certainly with James Madison. He did so certainly with Thomas Jefferson. And I think to find a person that is as close as a founding father from a different nation that you will find that has that level of documentation that is so revered on so many different angles and that is able to geographically be adopted as a national icon in Fredonia, New York, in Natchez, Mississippi, in Fayetteville, North Carolina, or in Claremont, New Hampshire, to me speaks volume about the ubiquitous dimension of his legacy. Americans have adopted Lafayette as a symbol of hope, a symbol of progress, a symbol of their Republican experiment. And he has yet to give up on that. He has yet to lose that status. You know, Lafayette Square in front of the White House is still there. You have a Lafayette Square in Buffalo. You have many state legislatures. I'll just talk about Virginia that has a bust made by Houdon of Lafayette that is still hanging. It's still there, right next to the Washington statue by Houdon inside the rotunda of the Capitol. There are so many symbols. It is really the tour of Lafayette has left. It's one of these instances of material culture. People have produced mass memorabilia to honor him, and you still find those in museums, in archives, and state houses, and federal buildings all over the country. So that's kind of my message: is look at Lafayette, look at what he provided for your country in your time of need, and look at the inspirational legacy that he has left behind that has a potential to keep the country together and help it move forward so it can keep writing the best days of its experiment, its incredible experiment.
Very well said. You mentioned something earlier that I thought was interesting, and that was as you were traveling through New York, both Western and downstate throughout, you talked to people and you noticed something different. You asked them a question and nobody could answer it. Tell us that story.
Oh, you're talking about what is a New Yorker? Well, that is interesting because to me, the New England states are smaller in size, and the Hudson River really cuts them off. That was the whole point of the British strategy, actually, during the first few years of the American Revolution. And here you have, as soon as you cross that river, you have this massive state that is kind of a transition space between the Mid-Atlantic and New England that's called New York State. That has always been a challenge to me to understand how such a huge state on the East Coast, from Buffalo to New York City, could have like a common identity. And I was asking people from Buffalo, from Albany, from New York City, what is a New Yorker? I don't think I received a convincing answer. I still don't know what connects them all together as people from one state. To me, it's a patchwork of different areas with their own identity that are indeed within the same state, but there are so many divisions on so many levels between upstate and downstate, or even between Western New York and Eastern New York. It's not the same economy. It's not the same problematics. And that to me has been interesting in itself. Yes, we talk about Lafayette, we talk about what he did in 1824, how people swooned over him. But nowadays, what is to me as a human experience, what is a New Yorker? You tell me, what is a New Yorker?
Well, believe me, I'm studying that myself, and there certainly are
Here
historical
you go.
reasons why you have differences in different parts of New York. But I will add this one thing: Eastern New York. So, do you realize Eastern New York is actually the state of Vermont? Prior to the
uh,
Revolutionary War, New York Colony included Vermont, and it was only during the Revolutionary War that what was those counties of New York Colony broke off and ultimately became their own independent republic before being admitted into the Union. So even that kind of speaks to a different history. What is a Vermonter? Why isn't a Vermonter a New Yorker? And there are answers, but probably better to have that for another show. We did have one question I want to get to. We had time for it. I actually asked the same question to you yesterday or the day before. Lafayette, spelling of the name. It's spelled differently.
yes.
Lafayette, two words, or Lafayette, one word. Can you
Yeah.
explain that?
Right. So there's a scholar that is in the 1920s that has actually written a little a segment about that. So long story short, because it takes a long time to explain, but the spelling that author, Mr. Gottschalk, argues should be used is Lafayette in one word, Lafayettete. There has been a practice that is a general practice, generalized across the country and beyond, to spell Lafayette in two words, La space Fayette, because if you are a Marquis of the Fayette, that's what it means. You are a landowner. It's referring to your land ownership, which is establishing an aristocratic status. Now, during the French Revolution, at some point, there is an opprobrium on the aristocracy, and many of them are going to be changing the spelling of their name to make it one word so that they would hide to some extent the aristocratic origins of their family. That is not an explanation that is necessarily that you should brought up for the spelling of Lafayette's name, but it is a tendency that has been used for other names around the country. So you have other authors. Madame de Lafayette is a famous author in France that she spells it in two words. So there are several names in the branches of the Lafayette family. The spellings have changed. Each individual is entitled to spell its name the way he wants or she wants. And most of the letters you'll find of Lafayette, actually probably all, it's Lafayette in one word. And yeah, he gives you plenty of explanations, Mr. Gottschalk, about how his wife also changed the spelling at some point, and it led to some confusion because just because the wife did it doesn't mean that the husband is going to do the same. So it's a very complex thing. But like, for instance, in my manuscript, I just stick to Lafayette in one word, and when I use it in two, it's because I'm quoting a document that uses in two, or that I'm quoting or I'm using an illustration that is captioned with Lafayette in two words, stuff like that. But for matters of consistency, I will use it in one word myself. But it's a very long subject. It takes a long time to explain, but I'm just giving you a kind of an elevator speech about the spelling of Lafayette.
Well, it was very instructive. Well, Julien, thank you very much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. I know you're traveling around the country too, and really enlightening us about Lafayette, the person, as well as the tour in particular on the Greater Western New York region. You've been a font of information. I can tell by your enthusiasm that you really like the subject, and I can't wait for your book to come out. You're going to have to tell me when it comes out so I can get it.
I will definitely let you know.
Yeah. Everyone, thank you for being a part of today's audience. And again, if you'd like to be a member of the audience where you can ask our guests questions, then go to stateof.westernnewyork.com. Just fill out the form there. It's free, and every Thursday morning for free. Everything's free here, no charge. You'll get the super secret invitation that gives you that link that no one else has to our live studio audience, and you can watch the show live and ask our guests any question that you might have. Otherwise, if you'd like to see the show later, it's always archived on our website. Same thing, stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com, or like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel. The show is rebroadcast on those platforms every Sunday at 1:30 p.m. That's all for this week. Again, thank you all for being here. We'll see you all next week.